Chapter 1. City A renowned entertainment complex. Eloise strode towards the parking lot in her high heels, with Jasper, her date for the evening, following closely but maintaining a respectful distance of over a meter. As an artist under Eloise's company, Jasper was well aware that her public persona and private conduct were quite different. Despite the many rumors surrounding her, she actually disliked people who lacked self-restraint from coming close to her. She stopped by a fiery red Porsche, and as Jasper halted, Eloise abruptly turned to him, coldly stating, "Call your assistant to pick you up." Before Jasper could react, she was already seated in the Porsche, which roared to life within moments and sped away, leaving Jasper with only a glimpse of the car's stylish rear. Jasper was bewildered, touching his face that had garnered 6 million followers, instinctively questioning, who said Eloise was friendly to handsome men? Indeed, if Eloise had no plans afterwards, she wouldn't have minded giving Jasper a ride, but unfortunately, she had an appointment at the Soft Rock bar. Thus, she had to coldly leave Jasper at the complex's parking lot. Tonight was the birthday party of the heiress of one of the major families in the north of the city, and coincidentally, the girl was a die-hard fan of Jasper. Eloise was well-versed in the intricacies of the business world, so she had brought Jasper along to the party. Half an hour later, the red Porsche pulled up outside Soft Rock Bar. Eloise changed back into her high heels in the driver's seat before stepping out of the car. As a regular at Soft Rock, the security greeted her with respect as soon as she alighted. Eloise handed over her keys with a composed expression and walked straight through the entrance. Soft Rock was a members-only bar with strict security checks at the door to prevent any undesirable elements from entering. However, as a VIP member and someone with a good relationship with the owner, Eloise was never stopped. Upon entering the bar, Eloise spotted a woman waving at her from a distant booth. With a slight curl of her lips, she walked directly towards the booth in her high heels, ignoring the admiring glances around her. "Tisk, why do you always make such a grand entrance?" Victoria pouted resentfully, though her words carried no trace of jealousy, only playful annoyance. "Is that so?" Eloise casually tossed her hair and took a sip from the drink on the coffee table, her movements fluid, instantly drawing attention. "As soon as you walked in, every man in here was glued to you. Need I say more?" Victoria knew that Eloise had her fair share of admirers, with her stunning looks and status as a future heir to the family business. From middle school on, men had been vying for her attention, and since coming of age, Eloise had been quite the flirt, with a string of relationships that could almost form a football team, yet she was choosy, only interested in those who were both handsome and well-built. Eloise remained silent, not responding to Victoria's exaggerated remarks. Victoria quickly changed the subject, asking, "Didn't you take Jasper to the Wang family's birthday? Where is he?" "I sent him away." "Sent him away? Why not bring him along? After all, he's a big star and quite handsome." Victoria, a severe visual enthusiast, had initially visited Eloise's entertainment company due to Eloise falling for a trainee and then a young singer. Her tastes changed frequently, but lately, she had taken a liking to Jasper. Jasper's recent TV dramas had made him one of the most popular actors this year, with many girls swooning over him. But he wasn't her type. Not interested, Eloise coolly stated, feeling somewhat bored. "Oh well, it doesn't matter whether he comes or not. What matters is..." Victoria spoke mysteriously, draping an arm over Eloise's shoulder and turning her towards the bar, excitedly whispering, "Isn't the new bartender incredibly handsome?" Eloise hadn't expected much, but upon glimpsing the man, she was momentarily stunned. "Absolutely. He's prime. I almost couldn't close my legs the first time I saw him. Look at that face, that waist. His butt is right on my G-spot. Too much. I'm going to die." Eloise was brought back to reality by Victoria's chatter, her gaze flickering with interest as she watched the man. Taking another sip of her drink, the cold rim against her lips led to a fiery sensation down her throat. Eloise licked her lips, her gaze settling on the man's aloof expression and lean waist, her interest piqued. Victoria noticed Eloise's curiosity and urged her, "This guy is your type. You should go for it. I'll stay out of it." Eloise met Victoria's gaze, catching the glint of mischief in her eyes. "What's the bet?" Victoria grinned wider, a new C-brand handbag. "Deal." With that, Eloise set down her glass, stood up decisively, and walked straight to the bar. Soft Rock, being a famous bar in City A, boasted a low-key yet luxurious interior. Its strict rules kept the atmosphere calm, with patrons who were more or less affluent, none daring to cause trouble for fear of hitting a hard place. Eloise was truly a regular, having frequented local bars during her time in the US and after returning to China and taking over a subsidiary. She had less leisure time, but eventually managed to silence the old guard and began to frequent Soft Rock again. Recently, her company had been negotiating a project, and she hadn't been to Soft Rock for half a month. To her surprise, a new face had appeared here in just a few days. Eloise sat in front of the man, her slender fingers tapping lightly on the bar. His gaze shifted to her, his eyes devoid of emotion, like an unfathomable abyss, aloof yet chilly. Eloise caught his gaze, her breath momentarily caught. Indeed, from afar, one could already sense his extraordinary presence, but up close, his sharply defined features and deep, dark eyes delivered a strong impact, prompting Eloise to inwardly agree. He was indeed quite captivating. But Eloise was experienced and had seen her share of high-caliber individuals. Quickly regaining her composure, she smiled at him, deciding not to speak first. The man seemed indifferent, barely glancing at Eloise before looking away, his attention lasting less than a second, making Eloise wonder if her charm had waned. "What can I get you?" His deep voice resonated, blending with the background music of the bar, making Eloise's ears tingle. He even sounded like her type. Eloise arched an eyebrow, her lips curling slightly as she maintained her intense gaze. "A kiss of an angel, please." The man silently began his work, his service not particularly warm, yet it was precisely this detached demeanor that was intriguing. Eloise had met many men, especially given her role in the family's entertainment business, and while there were indeed handsome ones, none had ever ticked all her boxes like this man did, from his facial features to his skin tone and even his hair. He wasn't short, likely standing at least 1.85 meters, and his sharp features contrasted with his pale skin, which under the dim lighting exuded a sense of cool reserve. His nose was, his lips thin, and his thick brows occasionally furrowed as he worked, his slender arms revealing hidden strength with each motion. Eloise had watched bartenders before, and although this man's skills might not rival the world's best, his straightforward, non-flashy style was appealing. Soon, a kiss of an angel was placed before Eloise. Her fingertips touched the base of the glass, but her eyes remained fixed on him, undisguised heat and interest in her gaze. She pushed the drink towards him, her eyes flickering on the house. Kiss of an Angel, with its sweet, delicate taste, symbolized the Cupid's arrow striking a lover's heart. Such a sweet name, in a bar setting, carried a hint of romance, akin to a sudden spark of love. The man looked at the freshly made drink, his brow furrowing slightly before returning to his usual icy demeanor. "Charge it to my account," Eloise said, standing up, her smile unchanging, her eyes alluring, like a goddess of the night. "I'm Eloise." With the formalities complete, Eloise turned back towards Victoria. However, amidst the relaxing background music, an abrupt sound of flowing water suddenly emerged. Eloise paused mid-step, glancing back just in time to see the man bending over, emotionlessly pouring the kiss of an angel down the sink, methodically cleaning the glass. The empty glass was placed back in its original spot as if nothing had happened. Chapter 2. The Office of QS Corporation's Subsidiary. In the president's office, silence reigned except for the soft scratch-scratch of a pen gliding across documents. Assistant Luke stood respectfully by the office, waiting to dispatch the freshly signed documents to the finance department. "Luke," Eloise, Patrick wrapped up his last tour yesterday and is arriving at the airport at 4 p.m. today. Eloise continued her work, signing with precision and then snapping the folder shut with a thud, handing it to Luke. "You don't need to report his matters to me anymore," Eloise said, her expression as cold as ever. Luke was slightly taken aback but knew Eloise's temperament well, so he didn't dare ask further, accepting the folder and preparing to leave the office. "Wait," Eloise suddenly recalled something and called out. Luke halted halfway. "Eloise, is there anything else?" "Buy the latest H-brand handbag for Victoria and put it on my tab," Eloise instructed without looking up. "Understood." Shortly after, the sound of the office door closing echoed. Eloise paused, a hint of fatigue crossing her face as she rubbed her temples, her mind inexplicably flashing back to the scene at the bar a couple of days ago. The newcomer had poured his drink into the sink right in front of her, his movements deliberate, especially his focused manner while wiping the glasses, exuding an innate elegance. Truthfully, she should have been angry, yet recalling his aloof expression and indifferent gaze, she found herself not the least bit furious, but rather oddly stimulated. Eloise pressed her tongue against her palate, a spark of interest in her eyes. In the past, Eloise and Victoria had often engaged in these trivial games. At the bar, they would target someone, and whoever got the contact could make any demand. Usually, it was Victoria who took the initiative, while Eloise didn't often participate, but each time ended with the other party requesting her contact. Eloise had thought this time would be no different. The $200,000 handbag she gave willingly. Though she had never lost a bet with Victoria before, this loss didn't seem so bad, especially since finding something entertaining does come at a cost. Her phone vibrated on her desk, pulling Eloise from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, seeing a message from someone. "Patrick, Eloise, I'm back. Dinner together tonight?" Eloise read the message, her gaze deepening. After a moment, she picked up her phone and replied, "I have plans tonight." "Patrick, with Carrie?" Eloise's finger hovered over the screen, suddenly feeling a pang in her brow. "Eloise, yes." With Eloise's confirmation, Patrick stopped replying. In fact, Eloise knew Patrick had feelings for her, but she genuinely didn't feel that way about him, so she had always maintained a deaf and mute stance. Young people are often moved by inexplicable things, and such feelings can transform into dependency. A 20-year-old can't distinguish love, it's unclear and undefined, so they arbitrarily label it as such. Her first encounter with Patrick was in the company's practice room. She had just returned from the US and was appointed president of the subsidiary, bearing immense pressure. She desperately needed to prove herself to silence those chattering in the boardroom. Patrick was a new trainee then, seemingly ordinary except for his striking looks. The first time she saw Patrick, the boy was dancing in front of a mirror, drenched in sweat, while others rested on the floor, looking exhausted. He was too eager to prove himself, just like she had been. Perhaps there was some personal sentiment in choosing to support him, but as a businesswoman, her investments were based on profit. She saw his commercial potential and the benefits he could bring to the company, so she backed him wholeheartedly. The gamble paid off. Patrick had become an undeniable star, a veritable cash cow for the company. She had always maintained a boss-employee relationship with him, unaware that he had developed those feelings. Eloise felt it was time to keep some distance. After all, she was principled. A 20-year-old boyfriend was too hot to handle. Besides, despite Patrick's good looks, he wasn't her type. She had never known what she preferred, but now, that newcomer seemed to be right up her alley. At 6 p.m., Eloise drove straight to the Xianju Pavilion after work. Her claim of having plans with someone wasn't a lie, just not with Carrie. As for Carrie, he had promoted to her ex a week ago, but he seemed keen on continuing the entanglement, calling and texting frequently, which was starting to annoy her. When Eloise arrived at the reserved private room, the man was leisurely sipping tea. He looked young, dressed in a suit and tie with gold-framed glasses, always sporting a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes, giving off an air of a refined scoundrel. And he was indeed a refined scoundrel. Jim arrived so early? Eloise raised an eyebrow, her tone familiar. Dressed in an A-brand professional outfit for work, Eloise looked formal yet fashionable, her delicate features made more striking by a light makeup. Jim's smile deepened at the sight of her, genuine this time. Eloise, no need to be so formal off the clock, right? But this is a business matter, Eloise replied, though her demeanor relaxed and she was more casual than in the office. They were from old family friends, having grown up together. Jim was 5 years older, always acting like an older brother. Somehow, over time, they became more than friends. Eloise, that's a bit heartbreaking to hear, Jim said, not looking the least bit hurt. We've grown up together, and I was your first love. Can't we talk about something other than business? Yes, Eloise and Jim had dated, even their first love. Honestly, Eloise didn't understand why she agreed to be with Jim back then. When they were dating, they both knew the score. Being from old family friends, a marriage would have been beneficial for both companies. When Eloise turned 18, Jim started managing his company. He made the first move, and she just wanted to experience love, so she went along with it. In reality, Eloise knew the ulterior motives, but since it was mutually beneficial, she didn't find it wrong. The relationship ended in a breakup. Eloise and Jim were too familiar with each other, knowing there was no spark. They interacted the same way as before, feeling no thrill of love. Some people are meant to be friends forever. Luckily, their families had no strong expectations or restrictions regarding their children's marriages. A successful relationship was welcomed, but failure wouldn't affect their family relations or cooperation. Today's discussion was about QS Corporation's cinema launching in Yoko department store. Since Eloise became vice president, they occasionally met as business partners. Professionally, they were impartial, but their private relationship remained unchanged. About 40 minutes later, many dishes on the table were nearly finished, and the details of the cooperation were mostly settled. As they finished their meal, they dropped their roles as Eloise and Jim, starting to talk about personal matters unrelated to work. Next month, the mall in the eastern city opens. I want to invite Patrick for the ribbon cutting, Jim said, his smile holding a hint of mischief. Will you help me ask him? Eloise ignored the teasing in his eyes, expressionlessly saying, I'll ask for you, should be fine. You know the kid's feelings, right? Eloise chuckled, you call him a kid? What thoughts could a kid have? Her words were quite ruthless, making Jim feel a bit sorry for Patrick. If you really don't have those feelings, you should make it clear sooner to avoid giving him false hopes. Eloise was silent for a moment, recalling Luke's report about Patrick's schedule and Patrick's message to her, doubting herself. When did she give anyone hope? I know. Also, you're not young anymore, can't keep playing around. It's time to settle down, Jim said, unconsciously taking on an older brother stance. Eloise lowered her eyes, took a sip of tea, and scoffed, the one who can make me settle hasn't appeared yet. Suddenly, the cold, frosty face popped into her mind, making her pause with her cup. Was she bewitched? Eloise knew she was interested in the newcomer, but thinking of his face multiple times seemed too unusual. After the meal, Jim offered to drive Eloise home, but she pointed to her car parked not far away. Seeing this, Jim didn't insist, just reminded her to be careful on the way. Eloise heeded Jim's advice, driving slowly. However, when the red Porsche was stopped by the third red light, she finally turned on the signal, stepped on the gas, and drove in the opposite direction of her apartment. Well, it'd be a waste not to find the $200,000 worth of fun. Chapter 3. Eloise arrived at the bar when it wasn't too crowded. Deciding on soft rock had been a spur-of-the-moment choice, otherwise she would never have come to a bar dressed in her professional attire. Before getting out of the car, Eloise specifically took off her outer coat, revealing the silk blouse underneath. She had unbuttoned her collar slightly, the delicate collarbone at the center adorned with a sparkling necklace, adding a touch of sensuality to her pale skin. She smoothed her black hair, applied her lipstick in the rearview mirror, and the elegant makeup paired with her vibrant lipstick shade appeared harmonious rather than out of place, instead gaining her a few points of allure. Once she was convinced she looked impeccable, Eloise removed her flats and slipped into high heels before stepping out of the car. To Eloise, high heels were a woman's weapon. After all, she was here to hunt, and different prey called for different gear. And she hadn't taken such care in a long time. Upon entering the bar, Eloise, as usual, took a seat in a corner booth, ordered some non-alcoholic drinks, and sat quietly on the sofa, observing the man behind the bar mixing drinks. Eloise knew the bartenders at Soft Rock rotated shifts, so there was a 50-50 chance she might miss her target today. Fortunately, her luck held out. Sitting alone in the upscale booth, her graceful figure and elegant visage drew many glances from people in the bar, primarily due to her mix of noble and seductive aura, which, at first glance, was captivating. Regular patrons knew her identity and refrained from bothering her, while newcomers were smart enough to recognize her expensive booth and the respectful demeanor of the staff, signaling her special status. Eloise, though here for someone specific, did not seem in a hurry, sitting calmly in her seat, with unabashed eyes fixed on the bar area, seemingly indifferent to the gazes around her. A skilled hunter is always patient, often lurking in the shadows waiting for the right moment to strike the most fatal blow to the prey. And patience was precisely something she had in abundance. Although this was their second encounter today, Eloise couldn't help but feel a flash of admiration upon seeing the man behind the bar. He seemed to have cut his hair shorter since their last meeting. Even a simple hairstyle looked unique on him. Wearing a white shirt, black trousers, with the shirt tucked in and an apron tied around his waist, his physique was model-like, broad-shouldered and narrow-hipped, dressed properly yet subtly alluring to Eloise. Her gaze deepened as she sipped her cold drink, suppressing the heat in her heart. Truthfully, the man's business was good. Driven by his looks, about 5 people approached to order drinks in the span of half an hour. Yet, his demeanor was cold, and those hoping to flirt with him retreated under his indifferent attitude. Most patrons here had some money, proud of their status. They believed their initiative was already a concession on their part. The smarter ones left after realizing it was futile, but a few, overly confident, refused to give up after being rebuffed. Crash. The sound of glass shattering echoed through the bar. However, with the large space and background music playing, this little drama in the corner didn't garner much attention. Though seated far, Eloise's focus remained on the bar, immediately noticing the disturbance. The woman at the bar had changed, her expression distinctly aggressive from a distance. Eloise sighed lightly, set down her drink, and approached the bar in her high heels. The newcomer was fiery, quite different from the usual bartenders here. In most cases, bartenders relied on tips, so they tended to be soft-spoken and sweet-tongued. They might encounter difficult customers, but usually opted for a roundabout approach, never risking a direct conflict. After all, the service industry required diplomacy, especially at a members-only club like Soft Rock, which advocated godlike service. Upsetting a customer meant likely losing one's job. Just a bartender. You're lucky I'm giving you face. What are you acting high and mighty for? As Eloise approached, she overheard this insulting remark. Frowning slightly, she glanced at the stern-faced man behind the bar and the spilled drinks and broken glass at her feet, quickly piecing together the situation. Indeed, with such a captivating face, it was inevitable to attract some unwanted attention. 10,000, how about it? The woman at the bar, unaware of Eloise behind her, seeing the man's silence, mistook it for fear, her arrogance escalating as she tossed a card onto the bar. 10,000 for a night with you. The woman said, her superiority palpable, her gaze disdainful yet tinged with hidden desire. Just a pawn controlled by her base emotions, embarrassed and then enraged by rejection. Such antics would normally not catch Eloise's attention, but this time, she admitted, she too was swayed by these base desires. The man's expression remained cold, standing straight, his gaze fixed on the ground. his demeanor unchanged, his eyes just as calm. The woman blathered on alone, feeling increasingly humiliated seeing his indifference. Truly ungrateful, taking kindness for granted. Call your manager over. If you don't beg me today, I'm not leaving. As the woman's voice fell, a scornful chuckle came from behind her. Ma'am, this isn't a market, shouting won't help here. Eloise said, stepping up to the bar, picking up the card thrown on the counter, idly playing with it between her fingers. Leaning against the bar, her smile remained, but the sarcasm in her eyes broke the woman's overbearing facade. Before the woman could react, Eloise's expression turned cold, and with a flick, the card slapped against the woman's face, a sound more satisfying than the glass shattering. Taken aback, the woman, Miss Chin, was momentarily stunned, her expression turning vicious as she recognized Eloise. Are you insane? Who do you think you are? Her voice shrill, Eloise frowned. Eloise didn't notice that the man behind her had finally moved, his dark eyes flickering before returning to normal. Miss Chin, appearing to be in her 30s, was decked in classic luxury, a nouveau riche aura about her. Few wrinkles, but her facial muscles were stiff, clearly post-injection. With such looks, she dared to covet Eloise's target? Call the manager. If you don't teach you two a lesson today, this won't end. Eloise chuckled, spotting the approaching bar manager, leaning back, arms resting on the bar, lazily saying, well, here comes the manager. The manager had been notified by staff when Miss Chin first broke the glass, but had been busy and only arrived after resolving his tasks, just as things were escalating. He walked briskly towards the bar, his expression tightening upon recognizing Eloise. Seeing the manager approaching, Miss Chin felt her confidence return, ready to demand he eject both Eloise and the man when the manager bypassed her to address Eloise respectfully. My apologies, Eloise, for any inconvenience. On behalf of Soft Rock, I apologize for any discomfort. Regarding any. Eloise had no interest in the lengthy apology, interrupting him, pointing to the bewildered Miss Chin, and asked, I thought members were strictly vetted here. So, how did she get in? What? Miss Chin was about to protest when the manager cut her off. We are deeply sorry for the trouble caused. Soft Rock will ensure a satisfactory resolution for you. Before Miss Chen could question, 2 security guards appeared, escorting her out without giving her a chance to speak. The manager repeatedly apologized before leaving with the guards, the onlookers watching silently before turning away, not daring to comment. With everyone gone, Eloise turned to the silent man, her lips curling into a flirtatious smile, teasingly saying, Handsome, after a hero saves the beauty, shouldn't it be time for the latter to repay with her body? The man's eyes darkened, turning to meet Eloise's sparking gaze, his low, clear voice finally breaking the silence. Chapter 4. Stay away from me. Eloise raised an eyebrow slightly. She wasn't the least bit annoyed by the man's ungrateful behavior, as she had her own motives. I did you a favor, shouldn't you say thank you? Eloise leaned on the bar, propping her chin on her right hand, her gaze fixed on the man. The man frowned slightly, but quickly reverted to his usual indifference. It seemed he treated everyone with such coldness, whether it was the arrogant Miss Chin or her now. He silently stepped out from behind the bar, walking slowly to Eloise's side, his expression unchanged as he looked at the shattered glass and spilled liquor on the floor, along with the unmelted ice. As he bent down to pick something up, his wrist was suddenly caught firmly in midair. Picking it up with your bare hands, you really are something. Eloise glanced at the man, an inexplicable anger suddenly ignited within her. It wasn't the indifference that bothered her, but his overly detached nature. This wasn't good. His dull eyes and slightly numb expression showed he seemed indifferent to everything around him. Too detached, as if he didn't even care about himself. Their standoff lasted a moment before the man abruptly looked up, their eyes meeting. His deep gaze was like a sharp blade, dissecting all her hidden thoughts without mercy. Eloise was momentarily stunned, her expression stiffening. Yes, she almost forgot. In essence, she wasn't much different from Miss Chin, Both were moved by appearances. "Let go." The man's cold voice carried a hint of anger, sending a chill down one's spine. Yet Eloise wasn't ordinary. Her unusual expression quickly returned to normal. Holding the man's wrist, her smile faded, and she firmly said, "Get up, use a broom, not your hands." The tense atmosphere subsided into calm. Eloise let go of his hand, and he seemed to regain his composure, standing upright again. As the man turned to leave, Eloise suddenly spoke from behind. "Since you can't repay me with your body, tell me your name." The woman smiled abruptly, her red lips confident and too striking. The man glanced back, his sharp features still cold under the dim, suggestive lighting. After a moment of silence, as he turned back, his voice accompanied by the soft background music reached Eloise's ears. "Leonardo." Eloise paused, watching the man walk away, her gaze growing deeper. At that moment, the hotel manager who had dealt with the matter returned to Eloise's side, respectfully saying, "Miss, we have revoked Miss Chen's membership. All your expenses today will be covered by Soft Rock. Are you satisfied with these arrangements?" Eloise didn't respond, her gaze still on Leonardo, silently repeating his name in her mind, then suddenly chuckled. The manager was puzzled, unsure what the laugh signified. Just as he was nervously contemplating, the young lady suddenly asked, "Do you have any cigarettes?" The manager quickly pulled out a pack of women's cigarettes from his pocket and handed it to Eloise, along with a lighter. His actions were fluid, instinctive. Eloise took a cigarette and held it between her fingers. The manager immediately bent down to light it for her. She didn't usually smoke, only occasionally taking a few puffs when stressed, and not usually of this brand. But now, she seemed overly excited, needing something to calm her down. "How long has he been here?" Eloise suddenly asked. The manager followed her gaze to where Leonardo was disappearing around a corner, hiding his surprise, and replied seriously, "About half a month. Keep an eye on him for me, so he doesn't get bullied." Eloise exhaled a smoke ring, the mist slightly obscuring her seductive face, making her somewhat inscrutable. If you can't handle it, let me know." Hearing this, the manager knew Eloise was serious about Leonardo. He quickly agreed, vowing to take care of everything. In their line of work, being adept at maneuvering was essential. Eloise, as the future heir of the QS Corporation, had an undeniable status. The QS Corporation was vast, and as its only heiress, she would inherit everything. There were rumors that QS Corporation might choose a suitor, stirring interest among many elites, as such a lucrative opportunity was hard to resist. Yet 2 years ago, after graduating from the US, Eloise directly assumed a role in a QS subsidiary, her style of operation as decisive as any seasoned business veteran. In 2 years, she flourished, and the industry largely accepted that she would eventually lead QS Corporation. Whether she would marry into a suitable family or not, those around her would benefit significantly, as evidenced by her past boyfriends. "That guy, he's really in luck," the manager thought to himself, then quickly reported the details to his superior after seeing Eloise off. He remembered when Eloise first came to Soft Rock, the usually aloof owner had come personally to greet her, even granting her a top-tier VIP membership. The owner's expression, though not obsequious, was clearly one of. The manager knew his place. Sure enough, upon hearing the news, the owner shifted from his casual demeanor to serious instructions to treat the new arrival well. The call lasted half an hour, and as he hung up, the manager couldn't help but think again, Leonardo really hit the jackpot. Eloise seemed to be in a good mood lately, something her employees at the company could sense. Luke, as Eloise's personal secretary, felt this even more acutely. Eloise, famous for her beauty, was accurately portrayed as someone whose smile could captivate 100 hearts with just a backward glance. However, Luke knew her character wasn't as gentle as her appearance suggested. At work, Eloise was meticulous. Her usual expressionless face meant someone was about to get in trouble if she smiled. Luke first met Eloise 2 years ago when she returned from the US. The new and old staff then had strong opinions about her, seeing her as a mere decorative presence, only gilded by her American education. Back then, Luke was a junior staff member in the secretariat and didn't join in the gossip. But he sensed that Eloise wasn't as simple as others said. Her presence was undeniable, and at just 22, she faced massive skepticism without flinching, as if anticipating a dramatic takedown. Indeed, the loudest critics faced their consequences. Within a year, Eloise had solidified her position at QS, proving her shrewdness. Luke was promoted to her personal secretary the following year, an expedited advancement. Observing her over time, he saw many changes around her. Eloise seemed affectionate but was actually quite aloof. Luke often struggled to understand her, as she was generous with her partners but could coolly detach at the end of relationships, regardless of pleas from ex-lovers. Luke couldn't imagine how someone deeply enamored would fare with Eloise, a callous heart. But that wasn't his concern. He only noted that Eloise was particularly happy recently, likely due to personal successes. That afternoon, Luke received a text from Eloise's boyfriend, Carrie, further confirming his guess. With half an hour remaining until the end of the workday, Luke entered the office, placed the documents on the desk, and said, "Eloise, Carrie texted me, saying he couldn't reach you." Eloise's expression paused, a cold smile forming at the mention of Carrie. She hadn't expected Carrie to be so insistent, despite giving him the cover of The Man. Greed was the worst trait. What else did he say? He said he'd wait for you tonight in room 1206 of XX Hotel, planning to surprise you. Eloise scoffed, then snapped the file shut, saying coldly, "Tell him I'm not interested in his petty tricks. He should leave quickly, or I'll show no mercy." Luke was perplexed. Chapter 5. Recently, Carrie has been quite troubled. He can't understand why, despite their seemingly good relationship, Eloise suddenly decided to break up with him. Not only was it unexpected, but she also didn't leave him any opportunity to mend things. All of his text messages and phone calls have been blocked, and even when he tried to visit her at work, the security guards stopped him at the door. Every means of communication had been ruthlessly severed by her, leaving him with no way to even ask for a reason for their breakup. Reaching out to Luke felt like a desperate move, and indeed, he harbored that exact thought. For the entire day, he made sure he was impeccably groomed, from his choice of attire to the scent of his cologne, all according to Eloise's preferences. After sending a text to Luke, he rushed to the hotel to prepare the room meticulously. However, he didn't expect that before he even met anyone, he received a message from Luke. His face darkened as he stared at his phone, and after an unknown duration, he dialed a number. 100,000 yuan, I need you to investigate something for me. Eloise received a text from the manager of Soft Rock Bar after work, informing her that it was Leonardo's shift today. Since that day, Eloise had added the bar manager's contact for emergencies. After all, the bar was a chaotic place, and if that young man were to get into trouble, she wanted to be the first to know. But it seemed the bar manager had misunderstood, as he kept sending messages every few days, reporting on Leonardo's schedule and occasionally sneaking in a few candid photos, which left Eloise feeling both amused and exasperated. Truthfully, the bar manager's photography skills were terrible, with every shot taken from an unflattering angle, but Leonardo's good looks made every photo look stunning regardless. The saying, "a thing of beauty is a joy forever," held true. Seeing the handsome face brought a bit of joy to her mood. The initial intention of adding the manager's contact wasn't for this, but inexplicably, things took an unexpected turn and Eloise, for some unknown reason, didn't stop it. It had been a week since she last visited Soft Rock. Standing in the elevator lobby, Eloise looked at the message from the bar manager and, 3 seconds later, let out a soft laugh. The bar manager hadn't expected a reply, considering he had sent several messages over the past few days without a single response, which made it seem as though Eloise had completely forgotten about Leonardo. Yet, just as the manager began to doubt that Eloise's interest was merely a whim, a message suddenly popped up in the chat box. "Eloise, I got it. In the unopened bar, the usually calm manager exclaimed in surprise. Oh my! At 9 in the evening, nightlife was just beginning. As usual, Eloise parked her car outside and handed the keys to the valet before entering the bar alone. The bar manager seemed to anticipate her arrival and was already waiting nearby. Having mingled in the bar scene for many years, the manager was a shrewd individual. Upon seeing Eloise, his eyes lit up subtly, and he approached her naturally, not overly enthusiastic. Miss, the usual seat? Eloise glanced at the manager, recalling his recent antics, and then smirked. You're doing well. The manager was slightly taken aback, then his smile grew more polite. You're jesting, Mississippi. It's an honor to serve you. Just then, the valet walked in from outside, returning Eloise's car keys. The usual spot, just a glass of juice, please. I need to drive tonight. Of course, take your time. Eloise settled into the sofa, her gaze instinctively falling on the bar. Not seeing who she wanted to, her eyebrows furrowed slightly, feeling a bit displeased. Where is he? Isn't it time for work? Slacking off on the job? Miss, your juice. The waiter's voice suddenly broke her concentration. Eloise pulled her gaze away, took the juice, sipped it lightly, and asked indifferently, Where's Leonardo? Startled, the waiter paused for a few seconds, glanced at the bar, then quickly and nervously replied, Leonardo must have gone to the restroom. He was at the bar just now. All right, I understand. Eloise said, her expression indifferent, as if the inquiry was just a casual remark. This waiter had been working at Soft Rock for a year, and it was his first time speaking to Eloise, having only heard colleagues gossip about how hooking up with her could secure one's future. Suddenly having a conversation with her, the young man's face turned red, stuttering before hastily leaving. Eloise didn't pay attention to the young man's peculiarities. With Leonardo still not showing up, she took another sip of her chilled juice, then placed the glass on the coffee table with a clink, and stood up to head towards the restroom. She had intended for an unexpected encounter, but to her surprise, as soon as she turned the corner, someone suddenly rushed up behind her, grabbed her wrist, and pinned her against the wall. Eloise, what do you mean by this? A furious shout echoed through the quiet corridor, sounding somewhat menacing. Eloise was momentarily dazed by the force, and when she came to, a hint of disgust flashed in her eyes, her expression coldly indifferent. Let go. The two words were icy, her disdainful gaze like a sharp blade, deeply wounding the man's pride. Carrie's eyes were bloodshot as he glared at the woman in front of him, unable to comprehend her cruelty. Their relationship had been fine while they were dating, and not long ago, she had still soothed him gently. He had spent $100,000 to trace her whereabouts. No matter what, he was determined to get an explanation from Eloise. I won't let go. Eloise, what do you mean by this? You cut off all contact with me after a breakup without even giving me a reason. How can I accept this? Carrie said, his handsome face now lacking any grace. Eloise, what do you take me for? Wanting me when you will, and discarding me when you please. Eloise frowned, her wrist hurting from being gripped so tightly. She had tried to pull away, but gave up due to his overpowering strength. So, she detested the ignorant. Things were clear on the surface. Relationships based on interest were now being discussed with emotions, which was delusional. Feeling the resources provided aren't enough? The cover of The Man Doesn't Satisfy You. Eloise said, not a bit flustered despite being at a disadvantage. Her gaze, laced with mockery, made Carrie feel exposed. Yes, he had almost forgotten. Lately, he had been climbing the ladder with the resources Eloise provided. Undeniably, when he agreed to be with Eloise, he did have 8 parts of him considering those intentions. The title of Eloise's boyfriend was too tempting, and power and money were always irresistibly attractive. Before meeting Eloise, he had suffered too much in this industry, enduring endless days with no hope of success. He believed he had never angered Eloise, always accommodating her during their time together. 2 months, Carrie couldn't believe Eloise hadn't been moved at all. Yet, reality seemed to have slapped him hard. She genuinely seemed to have never taken it seriously from the start. "Eloise, you know I don't mean that. I really do like you." Carrie's face softened, his eyes filled with tenderness. 2 months. We've been together for 2 months. How can you just break up like this? At least give me a reason. A reason? Eloise sneered. Carrie, we're both adults. What else could it be after a breakup? At this, Carrie's feigned affection couldn't hold, his expression stiff, and he unconsciously loosened his grip on Eloise's wrist. Isn't it just because the feeling has faded? Eloise seized the opportunity to pull her hand back and rubbed her sore wrist. Not wanting to waste any more time, Eloise was about to turn and leave when the man in front of her suddenly went wild, lunging forward to force a kiss on her. Eloise instinctively resisted. Although she wasn't a virgin and it wasn't her first kiss, being forced was indeed disgusting. The physical disparity between men and women made Eloise feel annoyed. Just as Carrie was about to succeed, Eloise unexpectedly caught sight of someone and shouted, "Leonardo." Taken aback, Carrie froze, and Eloise used the opportunity to break free from his grip and quickly moved to stand by Leonardo's side. "Carrie, I'm not someone who disregards old feelings." Eloise's face was cold, her entire aura icy enough to freeze. "You've overstepped." Repeatedly rejected, Carrie's male pride was trampled to pieces. His face darkened as he saw Leonardo standing next to Eloise. Suddenly realizing something, his anger flared again. "Eloise, tell me, are you breaking up with me because of him?" Leonardo, unexpectedly mentioned, frowned but quickly resumed his usual expressionless demeanor. Eloise glanced at Leonardo next to her, an idea flashing through her mind. Before the man could react, she hooked her arm around his shoulder. Her red lips brushed against his cool ones for a brief moment. Then she provocatively looked at Carrie from a distance, as if saying, "Yes, just as you think." "Fine. Eloise, you're really something." With that, the man turned angrily and left, leaving only the two standing in the corridor. Eloise breathed a sigh of relief, ready to step back, when she was suddenly pinned against the wall again. A fresh scent pressed close, and Eloise looked up to see the man's tightly furrowed brows, his eyes filled with intense anger and gloom. The next moment, his thin lips, now tinged with a touch of red, spoke in a low, dangerous voice at Eloise's ear. "Are you asking for trouble?" Chapter 6. The atmosphere instantly became tense, and Eloise's gaze fell on his lips, her eyes suddenly deepening. She had restyled herself before coming to the bar, and the lipstick she wore today was the 999 shade from D brand, a pure and vibrant color that looked even better smeared on his lips. When Eloise first met Leonardo, she thought he was like a glass of wine, a taste that could make one lightheaded, but the more they interacted, the more addictive he became. After a moment's pause, Eloise suddenly smirked, her eyes flickering with charm and seduction, a bewitching siren. "Are you angry?" Eloise said, her slender fingers reaching for his shoulder and then to his collar, smoothing out the creases in his shirt. "It's just a kiss." Her voice was subtly seductive. Unlike her cold and ruthless demeanor towards Carrie, she now exuded a bewitching warmth, as if a completely different person. Leonardo's brow remained clouded with gloom, his entire being in a state of extreme agitation, his hand braced against the wall, his body tense, like a beast on the brink of frenzy or a dark cloud charged with thunder, terrifying. Yet, someone dared to be recklessly bold, stepping forward on tiptoe, her lips close to his ear, whispering in a voice only the two could hear. "Or, was that your first kiss?" Warm breath brushed against his earlobe, coupled with the faint scent of her perfume, overwhelmingly invasive. His gaze darkened, and his breath deepened. The next moment, he suddenly reached out, pushing Eloise away forcefully before he stepped back quickly, creating a distance of about 2 meters. Eloise's back bumped against the wall unexpectedly, but it didn't hurt. Bitten by a prickly cat, Eloise didn't get angry. Leaning against the wall instead, she crossed her arms and looked at the man before her, her tone playful. "Did I guess right?" Leonardo remained silent, his brow furrowed even deeper, his thin lips pressed tightly together. When he spoke again, his voice was icy. Get lost. Getting lost was impossible. The pursuit of beautiful things always comes with a cost, and Eloise had plenty of chips in her hand. The man's slender figure stood in the empty corridor, his skin paler than most men, giving him an air of melancholy. His white shirt, slightly loose on him, and black trousers made his legs look long and straight. Uniform as it was, it looked like high fashion on him. Eloise's gaze lingered on the man's exquisite profile and the lean waist cinched by a black belt, her eyes darkening further. "Leonardo, you know I'm interested in you," Eloise said, her gaze intense. "Consider me, huh?" Leonardo turned his head, meeting her eyes, his lips curling slightly in a mocking sneer. The next moment, before Eloise could fully appreciate the beauty's cold smile, Leonardo ruthlessly averted his gaze and strode away from the spot. Watching the man's retreating figure, Eloise chuckled softly. She was indeed in a hurry, just moments ago entangled with Carrie, and now she was extending an olive branch to him. If this were any other person, they'd feel played, wouldn't they? She touched her forehead lightly, feeling that she was indeed regressing. At 4 a.m, the bar closed for the night. In the staff lounge, a few people were gathered, seemingly discussing something. "I actually talked to Eloise today. Her voice is so beautiful. Wow, you're something, buddy. I've been here over a year and haven't managed to talk to Eloise. She's at a different level. You're just dreaming." "True, but she's really stunning, and I wonder what perfume she wears. It smells so good." Leonardo, expressionless, walked to his locker, opened it indifferently. The waiter who spoke to Eloise remembered her question about Leonardo and immediately stopped talking. He secretly eyed Leonardo's face, feeling a sour twinge in his heart. TSK? Just because he's a bit handsome? Leonardo changed into his clothes, ready to close the locker when he suddenly noticed something. His gaze darkened as he looked at himself in the mirror, his lips stained with an unnatural color, her lipstick. His brows furrowed sharply as he reached out, rubbing his lips harshly with the back of his hand, as if trying to erase the lingering redness and sensation. Bang! The locker door was slammed shut, and the man, shoulders slung with a black backpack, left the lounge with an icy expression. The next day at the office, Eloise, upon entering, immediately instructed Luke to cancel Carrie's cover resources. Luke was initially confused when he heard the news, until Eloise shot him a cold glance, which snapped him back to reality. He quickly pulled out his phone to coordinate with the magazine editor about removing Carrie. In truth, Luke had been with Eloise for a year and knew she was generous. Those who dated Eloise had all gone on to thrive in their careers. There was a saying in the industry that being Eloise's boyfriend was a low-risk, high-return, good-benefit position. Once in place, life would be very comfortable. Moreover, Eloise was beautiful, a top beauty in the industry, capable of making headlines in the entertainment circle with just her looks. She was talented, had a strong background, and a charming personality, never indulging in childish tantrums. These qualities attracted many suitors, and indeed, most of Eloise's past boyfriends had pursued her. Of course, the initiator of the breakup was usually Eloise. But so what? Her severance pay was substantial. Like the previous Carrie, the magazine cover of The Man was a resource that many young talents in the entertainment industry fought for, yet before meeting Eloise, Carrie was merely an 18-line model, barely touching the corner of The Man. Eloise always advocated for a good parting, so she never stinted on her severance fees, often handing over assets that others envied. Most of the boyfriends were sensible, taking the money without much fuss, leaving with as still friends, and moving on with their careers. Luke didn't know about Eloise and Carrie's breakup until yesterday evening. It turned out that the magazine shoot for Carrie had already been considered a breakup gift. Withdrawing the severance fee was a first for Eloise. Luke didn't understand at first, but after some thought in his office, he guessed the underlying reason. Apparently, Carrie had tried to, rekindle the romance, and played some tricks that angered Eloise, prompting her to reclaim the magazine cover resources. At this point, Luke couldn't help but sigh for that Carrie. Sigh. One must be content, you know. That afternoon, Jim sent someone to the company to officially sign the contract for the QS Corporation Cinema's launch in Yoko department store. After seeing the person off, Eloise suddenly remembered her promise to Jim and decided to call Patrick proactively. He seemed to be busy, and it took a while for the call to connect. Eloise, why did you suddenly call me? Patrick seemed very excited, his voice unable to hide his excitement and delight. Eloise, however, didn't show any emotion, completely overlooking this, her tone distant as she said, "Next month's ribbon cutting at Yoko in the east of the city. You should go. Jim should be sending someone to contact your agent." Patrick was silent for a moment, then spoke again, no longer as cheerful as before. "That's all you have to say?" Eloise frowned, almost wanting to retort bluntly, but considering he was just a 20-year-old, such directness might be too harsh. So, the words she was about to say were swallowed back, choosing silence instead. "You." Patrick seemed to be frustrated that Eloise could be so indifferent, wanting to complain but knowing Eloise hated unreasonable tantrums, so he swallowed his grievances back, speaking again with anticipation. "We haven't seen each other in a long time. How about having dinner together tonight?" "Busy." "Eloise." "Call me Eloise." With a beep, the call was disconnected. Eloise pocketed her phone, inwardly feeling a bit annoyed. What a temper. It seemed she had been too indulgent with him. The spacious office returned to silence. Half an hour later, a text message alert suddenly sounded from her phone on the desk. "Bar manager, Eloise, something happened to Leonardo." Chapter 7. Leonardo's in trouble. The moment Eloise saw the message, her heartbeat skipped a beat. Instantly, a faint sense of panic swept over her. Honestly, she never thought Leonardo would get into trouble, especially since she had made it clear that people in the bar would look after him out of respect for her. Soft Rock had been in City A for so many years, and it had some reputation. She knew the bar owner, so she couldn't fathom how Leonardo could get into any real trouble. But, to her surprise, Leonardo did get into trouble. Her brow furrowed, Eloise set down her pen, rubbed her aching temples, and then typed back, "What happened?" The bar manager on the other end was equally confused. It wasn't even operating hours yet. The staff usually gathered at 4 in the afternoon. By the time he arrived at the bar, the incident had already occurred. "Bar manager, Leonardo got into a fight and has to pay $5,000 in damages." Got into a fight? Eloise was stunned for a moment before asking, "Did he seriously injure someone?" "Bar manager, he knocked a guy's $3,000 nose job askew." Seeing this, Eloise took a few seconds to process it before bursting into laughter. Her clear laughter echoed in the quiet office. Eventually, when she finally stopped laughing, she composed herself, though the smile lingered at the corners of her mouth. "Leonardo, oh Leonardo, you never cease to surprise me." Seeing that Eloise hadn't replied for a while, the bar manager couldn't gauge her thoughts and was starting to panic, scratching his head in frustration. Then, suddenly, she called him via text. The bar manager nearly dropped his phone in his haste to answer. "Hello, Eloise? What exactly happened? You shouldn't be on duty at this time, right?" Eloise asked, her tone as indifferent as ever, yet there was a hint of amusement if one listened closely. The bar manager began, recalling the scene from half an hour ago. "The person he hit was a customer at our bar. Leonardo came in today, and she was following him. I heard from other staff that the customer was trying to get too friendly, and then..." As Eloise listened, she could almost picture the scene in her mind. It wasn't surprising, though. Leonardo was good-looking and just an ordinary guy from a poor background. Anyone with some resources would want to become his patron, just like her. This was probably another woman who had been blinded by his beauty, trying to force herself on him and get some advantage. At this thought, Eloise subconsciously touched her nose, remembering the scene from the previous night, and inexplicably felt relieved. It seemed he had been lenient last night. A $3,000 nose, Why is the compensation $5,000? Eloise asked. The extra $2,000 is for mental distress, the bar manager replied. Eloise was momentarily speechless, then couldn't help but chuckle a few seconds later. Right, she had wanted to take advantage, but ended up with a crooked nose and likely quite a scare. Eloise, what do you think we should do? The bar manager asked, unsure of the next steps. He had promised to keep an eye on Leonardo, but never expected an incident like this. Following Eloise's instructions, he had informed her immediately. Leonardo seemed to be at a disadvantage. The security footage clearly showed that the woman had approached him first, trying to hug him. Leonardo had dodged coldly, and an accident occurred in the back and forth. The nose did look bad, and even the police would likely side with the victim. I understand, Eloise said. Bar manager? Understood? And then? Eloise. Actually, Leo is quite wronged here, and his family situation isn't great either. Coming up with $5,000 all at once might be a bit. The bar manager didn't finish his sentence, but the meaning was clear. He thought Eloise might directly say she'd cover the $5,000, but instead, she seemed unwilling to intervene. This was unusual. He had heard before that Eloise once gifted a sports car worth $2 million to a young star just to win his favor. $5,000 was just a fraction of that, so why was she silent now? The bar manager, hoping to witness a wealthy woman splurging on a man, felt a bit disappointed, his expectations dashed. Keep an eye on him for me, and I have to hang up now. Eloise ended the call, placed her phone back on the desk, and picked up her pen to continue reviewing documents. But for some reason, her mind remained unsettled. Half an hour later, Eloise set down her pen again and dialed an internal line. Within 2 minutes, Luke entered the office from outside. Eloise, what can I do for you? Look up someone for me. He's currently working at Soft Rock Bar. His name is Leonardo. Luke paused for a moment, but his professionalism took over, and he didn't ask further questions, respectfully agreeing and then exiting the office. The spacious office fell silent again. Eloise leaned back in her chair, her mind filled with the bar manager's recent words. She knew this incident with Leonardo was purely accidental, unfortunate for him, and $5,000 was no small amount for an average wage earner. Moreover, from the bar manager's tone, it seemed the man was currently short on cash. To be honest, $5,000 was nothing to her. If it could win the favor of a handsome man, she wouldn't hesitate to spend $50,000, $500,000. But the problem was, Leonardo probably wouldn't appreciate it, or rather, he might detest it. On one hand, her relationship with Leonardo was barely acquaintances. After a few meetings, she had ulterior motives, but he likely had none, possibly even negative feelings towards her. She had no reason to cover his $5,000. On the other hand, she was sure Leonardo wouldn't accept it, and taking matters into her own hands might offend him. She didn't deny that pursuing a young man could be costly, but the money had to be spent wisely. At this thought, Eloise sighed again, pulling at the corners of her mouth, feeling a bit exasperated with herself. When had she ever been so invested in someone before? Hey, lad. You're in there, aren't you? Come out right now. Stop pretending to be dead. You've delayed the rent for how long? If you keep this up, I'll break the door down. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the slightly rusty iron door was pounded loudly. The man sat up in bed, his expression pale and lifeless, dark circles under his eyes, clearly not well rested. The shouting outside didn't stop, as if determined not to give up until the door was opened. Leonardo pursed his lips, then got out of bed, put on his slippers, and walked to the front door. The door was abruptly opened, and the landlady outside was momentarily stunned. Then her face showed clear disgust and disdain, her tone full of contempt. When are you going to pay the rent? How long are you planning to delay it? This isn't a shelter. There's no such thing as free accommodation. Rent was due monthly, and 2 days ago was the agreed date for payment. Leonardo usually didn't delay the rent. Sometimes he would forget, but he would always pay up immediately when reminded, which was usually within a few days. However, the cost of living had recently increased, and housing had become tight. The place was remote and in poor condition, but it was cheap, so Leonardo had lived there since graduating from university. Recently, the landlady seemed dissatisfied with the rent and wanted to increase it. However, the lease was signed for a year, with the rent paid monthly. The landlady had initially signed the contract with the intention of tricking the tenant, as new graduates usually didn't have much money and might not be able to pay for a full year up front. She was also afraid the tenant might leave after just a few months, so she had signed a year-long contract. She had done this to protect her own interests, but ended up restricting herself. "Give me 2 more days," Leonardo stated, his expression impassive, his voice slightly raspy. "What? 2 more days? Young man, if you really don't have the money, don't rent here. I don't need the little bit you owe me." The landlady was over 60, living a life of petty commerce, full of cunning. Leonardo's good looks didn't sway her at all. Instead, she thought him a pretty boy, all show and no substance. Facing the landlady's sarcastic remarks, Leonardo's expression remained unchanged, his silence suggesting complete disinterest. His reaction was too cold and uninteresting. The landlady continued to rant for a while without eliciting any response, eventually losing interest and sternly saying, "You must pay by the day after tomorrow," before turning and leaving. Leonardo closed the door again, turned back to his bed, and enjoyed the quiet in the small room. Yesterday, he had accidentally injured a woman's nose, almost spending all his savings on compensation. The monthly rent was $1,800, and he was now short by $50. But he had found a part-time job earlier, with daily wages paid the next day, just enough to cover the rent. However, this left him with no money at all. The man lay down again, his 6-foot frame curled on a single bed, the silent air growing heavy and oppressive. The hem of his white t-shirt lifted slightly, revealing a patch of pale skin and his slender waist. His lifeless eyes showed no luster, and after a few seconds, he closed them. The unpleasant faces and vile words from his memory surged back, suffocating. Wouldn't it be better to just die? Chapter 8. U.S. Corporation Branch President's Office. What did you find out? Luke stood before the desk, his gaze briefly meeting Eloise's, who was icily composed, leaving him with an inexplicable sense of unease. It had been 3 days, and Luke had hired a private investigator to dig into the life of the man named Leonardo. Initially, Luke didn't know what Eloise's purpose was in investigating him, but after seeing the young man's photo, he immediately understood. Oh, another case of being captivated by good looks. To be honest, this Leonardo was really handsome. Even he, a young man himself, had to admit it. Compared to Eloise's previous boyfriends, although they were all good-looking enough to form a 101 boy group, when it came to pure looks, Leonardo was undoubtedly at the center. But then again, nobody's perfect. God gave this young man such stunning looks, but his background was worse than most. The information was sent to his email late last night, and he had skimmed through it on his way to work this morning. Although he didn't know Leonardo personally and couldn't fully empathize with his plight, just reading the cold text made him feel the heaviness behind it. Luke handed the file to Eloise, and the office was unusually quiet. Eloise didn't ask any questions, took the file, and set aside her work to start reading Leonardo's profile. Leonardo, male, 23 years old. From a middle-class family, but at the age of 7, his father had an affair and rarely stayed home, leaving his mother alone. Later, unable to bear the betrayal and constant neglect, she developed severe depression and, when Leonardo was 10, stabbed his father to death before committing suicide. In an instant, Leonardo became an orphan. For the next 3 years, Leonardo suffered inhuman treatment. His father ignored him, and his mother, plagued by depression, often acted irrationally, venting her anger at her husband's infidelity on Leonardo, hurling insults and physical abuse. Leonardo was always covered in bruises, like dreadful marks that never faded, and his schoolmates gradually distanced themselves from him. Leonardo's grandparents had passed away early, and after no one took care of him, he was sent to live with his maternal grandparents. However, according to the information, they didn't treat him well. Eloise's frown deepened as she read, a vague, inexplicable emotion spreading in her heart, accompanied by a stinging pain, rhythmic with her breathing, making it hard to bear. When she first met Leonardo, Eloise felt he was extraordinary. A person's eyes don't lie. Young men his age usually have grand aspirations, their eyes filled with hope and yearning for the future. But Leonardo was different. His gaze was too cold, too lifeless, like a dead body of water. He had stories, but they were all dark. The file mentioned that Leonardo moved out of his grandparents' house after getting into university, funding his own tuition and living expenses through part-time jobs, never asking his parents for a penny again. Last year, after graduating, Leonardo rented a small place in a remote area. He had previously interned at an ordinary company but was apparently fired just before transitioning to a full-time position for offending his superior, and then ended up working at Soft Rock Bar. The information wasn't extensive, but it was detailed. Eloise finished reading it in less than 10 minutes. The detective had also attached a photo at the end of the file, showing the man in his high school days. The boy in the photo looked much younger, but his expression, gazing at the camera, was as numb as it was now. His skin was pale, and, even in a loose uniform, his thinness was evident. It was clear the photo was taken from a graduation photo, with a serious, slightly silly posture, yet it couldn't hide his handsomeness. Eloise looked at the boy in the photo, her gaze deep. Her brow, strained from long concentration, felt sore, and she rubbed her temples before closing the file with a snap, tossing it onto the desk. It was really frustrating. Luke stood quietly by, occasionally glancing at Eloise, feeling the tension emanating from her, making the air heavy. Honestly, Luke felt angry when he first read the information too, but people often adopt a "it's none of my business" attitude. The initial anger would pass. But looking at the situation now, Eloise seemed quite concerned about Leonardo, and he had never seen her this angry before. "Eloise, there's a new development," Luke suddenly said. Eloise's stern look didn't ease, her tone even colder than usual. "Speak." "Leonardo has been doing part-time jobs lately. On the days he's on duty, he works from 4 in the morning at the convenience store until past midnight when he goes back to his rented room." Hearing this, Eloise's head throbbed with pain again. This guy, why push himself so hard? Does he not want his life anymore? Luke seemed to understand what Eloise was thinking, so he quickly explained, "It seems he recently injured someone and needs to pay medical fees, plus it's time to pay the rent, and his landlord doesn't want to renew the contract, so money is tight." Eloise suddenly remembered what the bar manager had told her over the phone a few days ago, mentioning Leonardo's poor family situation, but she never imagined it was this bad. A wave of anger surged up again. "I need his address," Eloise said, her icy expression unchanged. "Yes, I'll send it to your phone right away." As Luke was about to leave, Eloise suddenly added, "Wait, find me an apartment, not too big, but with good transportation, complete facilities, and high security." Hearing this, Luke knew Eloise was about to spend money again. Sure enough, the next moment, Eloise's voice came again, "Buy one that looks good enough. Put it on my account." Luke wasn't surprised by this, having seen Eloise splurge on handsome men before, and by now, he could handle her spending habits with ease. "By the way, make it a bit cozy." At 4 in the morning, Soft Rock Bar finished its day's business. Leonardo stood in front of the locker, expressionlessly changing out of his work clothes and putting on his own jacket. The mirror on the locker door reflected the man's tired face, quite haggard. Dark circles were heavy under his eyes, his complexion was unnaturally pale, and his cheeks had visibly thinned. These days, due to part-time jobs, his sleep was severely lacking. He had paid the rent, but he only had a few dollars left. It was still half a month until the bar paid his salary, and he had to work a few more part-time jobs to cover his living expenses for that period. His expression showed no resentment, just the usual calm as he packed up and prepared to leave. "Hey, Leonardo." A colleague's voice suddenly called out from behind. Leonardo paused his steps and, after a few seconds, turned back indifferently, meeting the colleague's gaze with unwavering eyes. The colleague paused, then forced a smile, asking sarcastically, "Why hasn't Eloise been coming to see you lately? Has she forgotten about you?" The speaker was the server who had accidentally talked to Eloise earlier. For some reason, he had been increasingly annoyed by this new bartender. Everyone else was working hard at the bar, and here he was, relying on his looks to attract women, probably trying to pick up a rich lady and ascend to the peak of life. What a joke! Hearing the name Eloise, the man's dead eyes seemed to stir slightly. A vision of the bright-faced woman flashed before him, along with the kiss in the stairwell that night. After a while, the man pursed his lips, not intending to respond, turning back and walking out of the rest area on his own. Leonardo's indifference was too cold, causing the server to feel a surge of anger, shouting at his retreating back, "Give up. Eloise will never fancy someone like you. She's just playing with you because you're good-looking. Don't get too carried away just because of your face. You're not even good enough to lace Eloise's shoes." The voices faded as he walked further, until he stepped out of the back door of the bar, completely gone. Yet, the words still circled in his mind, annoying. He had never hoped for anything, never. The man tightened the straps of his backpack, his jawline tense, just about to step forward when a wave of dizziness hit him. His legs went weak and his vision blurred. The next moment, a familiar fragrance reached his nose, and he fell into a warm embrace. Before he lost consciousness, he seemed to see a familiar profile and heard a woman's worried call, calling his name. "Leonardo." Chapter 9. "It's all your fault. All your fault. Why? Why are you doing this to me? Why don't you just die? Die already. I'm sorry, I'm sorry." Broken phrases, sharp curses, and remorseful apologies echoed in his ears, like countless hands pulling him into the abyss. Dark, pitch black. Just like his past life, filled with guilt and despair. Yes, why hadn't he died yet? What was the point of living? Wouldn't death be less painful than this? In his hazy state, he seemed to faintly hear something, a faint ray of light piercing through the fog and landing on his eyelids, weak yet stubborn, forcing him to open his eyes. "Doctor, is he okay?" "He's fine, just a temporary faint from lack of sleep and malnutrition, should wake up soon." "Does he need to be hospitalized?" "No need for that, but his physical condition seems poor. He should come in for a full checkup if possible." "All right, I understand." When Leonardo opened his eyes, he saw the white ceiling, the smell of hospital disinfectant in his nose, not too overpowering. "You're awake." A familiar voice sounded by his ear, and Leonardo's blurry eyes suddenly cleared, returning to their usual coolness. Instinctively, the man sat up from the hospital bed. But due to his weak state, the sudden movement caused a lack of blood flow to his brain, and he had to cover half his face with his hand, slowly adjusting to the dizziness. Eloise sat nearby, watching his slightly self-destructive behavior without intervening. Truth be told, she wasn't the benevolent type, and she wasn't in the habit of warming up to gloomy kids. As a wealthy heiress, she had her share of bad habits. Unlike other socialites who preferred a gentle and kind princess image, she always acted according to her whims. Not a saint with no intention of saving the world, her interest in Leonardo was purely due to his face and his icy demeanor. Simply put, Leonardo had reignited her long-lost desire to conquer. Eloise always believed she wasn't the overly sympathetic type. No matter how tragic someone's background, her pity was fleeting, not strong enough to make her waste her time on them. But for some reason, after reading Leonardo's file this morning, she found herself uncontrollably angry. This emotion was out of control, making her unable to calm down all day. She had always thought herself not very emotional, even though she liked to do as she pleased. Her rationality usually took precedence. But the fact that she couldn't fall asleep until 3 in the morning made her doubt herself. Unable to figure it out, she decided to head to the bar. She needed validation, an explanation. To her surprise, as soon as she arrived, she saw him looking ready to collapse, prompting her to rush over. Eloise swore she had never run so fast in her life, fearing he might fall face first onto the ground. Such a handsome face, if it got bumped or bruised, she'd definitely be heartbroken. It was late, and calling an ambulance was slower than driving him herself. So Eloise single-handedly managed to get the 6-foot-tall Leonardo into her car and rushed to the hospital. By the time all the hustle was over, it was already 7 in the morning. Tired and exhausted, her expression wasn't any better. Eloise sat beside the bed, arms crossed, her face slightly gloomy, unlike her usual charming smile. After some unknown time, Leonardo seemed to finally recover. Glancing at the 4 in his hand, he slightly frowned and spoke. "Thanks for the trouble. How much for the medical fee? I'll transfer it to you." His voice was a bit hoarse, his complexion not much better, but his words remained cold, as if he had put on all his armor and was holding a knife, pointing it straight at her. What an ungrateful brat! In an instant, the gloom on Eloise's brow deepened. The next moment, she suddenly stood up from the chair, took 2 steps forward, and bent over. Leonardo's face was tense, his gaze elsewhere, but he could still feel her approach and the familiar scent spreading around his nose. His mind suddenly flashed back to what some employees had said in the break room a few days ago. "Wonder what perfume she uses, it smells nice." However, just as Leonardo was lost in thought, his ear suddenly itched, and the next moment, a woman's seductive and challenging voice sounded by his ear. "Trying to be tough with me?" His pupils constricted, his hand on the white sheets tightened, clutching the blanket in his palm. His body stiffened, the warm breath lingered around his ear, but for some reason, he didn't push her away as he had before. His eyes lowered, his long eyelashes fluttered. The exquisite profile combined with the pale complexion inexplicably added a touch of pathetic charm. Eloise glanced at his hand with the saline drip, the creases between her brows deepened, and she instinctively said coldly, "Let go." Almost as soon as the words left her mouth, the man's hand clutching the blanket suddenly loosened. Seeing this, for some reason, the irritation that had been suppressed in Eloise's heart all day suddenly dissipated, her pressed lips slightly curved, and a soft laugh escaped. Only then did Leonardo react. He seemed to be too obedient, completely led by the nose by her. His expression darkened a few shades, yet he still didn't turn to speak. Eloise straightened up, took 2 steps back, and sat down on the chair again. After teasing him, it was time to get down to business. "I don't like owing anyone. You helped me get rid of Carrie that night at the bar, so now you can make any demand you want," Eloise said, her gaze openly fixed on his face. Leonardo had lost a lot of weight, his loose jacket barely covering any flesh, something she had noticed while lugging him to the car. Based on her extensive experience, Leonardo was definitely not the muscular type when undressed, more likely the youthful, slender build. He needed to gain some weight. She preferred a man with abs. Eloise looked serious, but her mind was wandering to all sorts of random thoughts. Time ticked by. The man still sat on the bed, unresponsive. Work time was fast approaching. Eloise glanced at the watch on her wrist, then spoke in a businesslike tone. "It's 7:18 now. I'll give you 5 minutes to give me an answer." 7:18. Hearing this, the man on the bed finally moved, suddenly turning his head to look at Eloise with rare surprise. He paused for a moment, then, regardless of the saline still dripping, he reached to lift the blanket and get off the bed. However, Eloise seemed to have read Leonardo's thoughts, and before he could get off the bed, she calmly said, "No need to rush. I've asked my assistant to take care of your leave." Leonardo's hand lifting the blanket stopped in midair. Then he looked at Eloise with a few more hints of anger. "You investigated me?" His gaze was indeed terrifying, but Eloise wasn't intimidated, merely raised an eyebrow and retorted, "And if I did, what then?" Their eyes locked, the atmosphere beginning to tighten, like an invisible battle. But Eloise wouldn't lose, and after a while, It was Leonardo who first averted his gaze. Right, she was the famous Eloise. She could investigate whoever she wanted. What right did he have to question her? He wasn't even worthy to shine her shoes. Leonardo, I said, you helped me, so you can make any demand you want, Eloise said, her tone a bit tempting. The man lowered his gaze, staring at the white blanket, his eyes dark and lifeless. After a full 5 minutes of silence, he finally broke the tranquility. 3,000. Give me $3,000. 3,000? Eloise's lips curved. She continued to entice. Are you sure you only want 3,000? I said, any demand is possible, whether it's 3,000, 30,000, 300,000. She paused, then continued, even 3 million. His emotions showed no fluctuation, his voice as cold as ever. No need, just 3,000. $3,000 was enough to cover a month's rent and the rest of his living expenses for half a month. More wasn't his to claim, he shouldn't have aspired to excess. Eloise sighed softly, at a loss whether to call him stubborn or foolish. Then add my number, I'll transfer it to you directly. Leonardo didn't speak, just coldly pulled out his phone from his coat pocket, tapped on the screen a few times, then handed it to Eloise. Adding her number was certainly self-serving. That angel's kiss hadn't gotten his contact info, and now, for $3,000, he should definitely add her. But when Eloise was about to scan the code to add a friend, she saw that the code he presented was actually a payment code for receiving money. As a veteran in the field of love, Eloise was getting a bit annoyed after repeatedly hitting a wall. Her expression darkened. She grabbed the man's phone, swiftly added her number, and transferred the money. She tossed the phone back onto the bed, then said coldly, I've transferred the money. The extra 100 is for your taxi. As for the medical fee, don't worry about it. And I've also quit your job at the convenience store. You don't need to go back there anymore. Eloise finished and turned to leave the ward, but Leonardo suddenly caught the key point and asked, puzzled, didn't you say it was just a leave? Halfway through stepping out the door, Eloise paused, turned her head, her eyes sparkling, and her smile dazzling. The next moment, her charming, seductive voice echoed in the quiet ward. Honey's words can't be taken seriously, remember that from now on. Chapter 10. Eloise hadn't slept all night, and after leaving the hospital in the morning, she hurried back to her apartment, changed clothes, and put on a light makeup before driving to the company. Due to lack of sleep, Eloise couldn't muster any energy all day. Even reading documents made her dizzy, forcing Luke to make 3 cups of coffee before she could shake off her drowsiness. Luke seemed to notice Eloise's fatigue as well, and during the afternoon report, seeing her noticeably bad complexion, he couldn't help but ask with concern, Eloise, didn't you rest well last night? Eloise's hand signing the documents paused, and after a while, she suddenly smiled, her tone not showing any annoyance. Yeah, went to save a gloomy teenager. Upon hearing this response, Luke instantly grasped who Eloise was referring to and couldn't help but secretly vent his disapproval. When did Eloise ever show so much concern for a man? Not sleeping at night to send warmth instead? But Luke only dared to think so in his heart. He certainly didn't have the guts to tease her openly. Eloise, how about you take a break? There's also the Big Soft charity gala tonight, so... Hearing this, Eloise suddenly remembered this event. She rubbed the sore spot between her eyebrows, couldn't help but curse inwardly. Beauty is misleading. In the past, when she pursued men, she never let work slide, but yesterday her mind was full of Leonardo all day, forgetting about the charity gala tonight. Big Soft, as a renowned charity foundation, has a high reputation in the circle. Every year when it hosts the charity gala, many company bosses attend, and the media reports extensively. In essence, it's an opportunity for some big shots to build a good reputation under the guise of charity. Although the motive is impure, in essence, it's not a bad thing, because the final donations do reach those in need. The entertainment industry is highly profitable, and many famous stars raise their popularity by doing charity. However, Big Soft, as the most iconic charity platform, is not accessible to everyone. Only top-tier celebrities in the entertainment industry receive invitations. QS Corporation, as a frequent guest of Big Soft, used to attend these events represented by the group's vice president. However, since Eloise became the president of the subsidiary, this responsibility fell on her. Eloise's father also wanted to expand his daughter's social circle, so he handed over this money-splashing task to her. This was not a small matter, and Eloise could not afford to miss it. "I know, you can go now," Eloise said, resuming her work. If she wanted to rest, she first had to finish the work at hand. It wasn't right to let the company wait for her. "Eloise, should I inform Patrick in advance?" "Patrick?" Eloise thought for a moment, then immediately realized. Patrick was a pure newcomer, previously with no works to his name, and his swift ascent within 2 years couldn't have happened without Eloise's support. In addition to the company's financial backing, Eloise also took him to important events to expand his network. After several such outings, when the industry's bigwigs became familiar with Patrick, they would naturally consider him for future resources. Moreover, Patrick himself was highly professional, and under such strong promotion, he withstood the skepticism from outsiders. Now, Patrick has established a certain status in the entertainment circle, no longer needing her to spend effort on him. However, Eloise has always taken Patrick to these occasions, plus this time Big Soft also sent an invitation to Patrick, so Luke subconsciously thought that at the charity gala today, Eloise would still be accompanied by Patrick. "No need," Eloise said, suddenly feeling that her actions back then were indeed a bit misleading. It was quite troublesome to explain now. Suddenly looking up, Eloise met Luke's gaze, her expression and tone both slightly stern. "Luke, Patrick and I are only superior and subordinate, you should understand. He's just an ordinary artist in my company." Receiving a subtle reminder, Luke's back stiffened, a cold sweat breaking out. "Yes, Eloise, I understand," he replied respectfully, not daring to slacken, and left the office with a tense nerve. Only when he returned to his desk did Luke slowly relax, thinking to himself, indeed, one shouldn't indulge in gossip, or it might cost you your job. At 7 in the evening, the Big Soft charity gala was star-studded, with familiar faces from the entertainment industry and figures from various fields gathered. The Big Soft charity gala is mainly divided into 2 parts. One is voluntary donations, the other is charity auctions. Reporters are allowed to take photos outside the venue, but they have no access to the actual gala. However, the final transaction amounts and donation details will be listed on the official website immediately after the event, including all auction items, and their final deal also will be announced. At this time, the gala had not officially started, and all invitees were gathered in the hall, engaging in lively conversations, a prime opportunity to expand one's network. Sometimes, deals are made in the "I'll give you face, you owe me a favor" scenario, which is a fact that has always been undeniable. In a corner, Eloise and Jim stood side by side, attracting glances from many, though few had the intention to approach. In the face of everyone's gaze, Eloise indifferently changed her stance to relieve her fatigue. Jim beside her naturally noticed Eloise's unusual state and couldn't help but ask with concern, "Didn't you rest well? Or is it too tiring at work?" Jim had watched Eloise grow up, and although their past relationship did seem a bit absurd when looking back, he had always seen Eloise as his sister over the years. He knew Eloise's character since childhood, wild at times, but also clear about the responsibilities she bore. "It's nothing, just didn't sleep well last night," Eloise replied without changing her expression, her face not looking too haggard thanks to makeup. Before coming to the gala, she had rested for half an hour, tired indeed, but much better than in the afternoon. "Why did you think of inviting me this time? Aren't you going to find your little star?" the man beside her teased. Eloise gave Jim a cold look. Meeting his smiling face, she restrained the urge to roll her eyes. "Didn't you say not to leave illusions? The logic is sound, but that little star seems quite heartbroken now," Jim said, nodding towards the crowd. Eloise followed his direction and met a pair of eyes filled with grievance and indignation. Her expression tightened, mentally cursing, but outwardly she silently averted her gaze, pretending nothing had happened. In fact, even before coming to the gala, Eloise knew that she and Patrick were bound to meet at the venue. If Patrick had any sense, he should now obediently go to other producers or industry insiders to make an impression. After all, he had always attended various events with her, inevitably tagged with Eloise. This time, as an individual invited to Bigsoft, it recognized his ability and status, so it was the perfect opportunity to break free from her label and develop his own network. But Eloise didn't expect that Patrick would actually lack brains. "He's coming over," Jim said cheerfully, clearly enjoying the drama. Eloise frowned, and the next moment a shadow fell over her, and the boy's questioning voice sounded beside her ear. "Eloise, I've been waiting for you all day." Around them, people seemed to have noticed the scene and cast curious glances. I said, "Call me Eloise." Eloise's expression was cold, her tone distant. Hearing this, Patrick's eyes immediately turned red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, appearing quite tragic, as if abandoned by the world. "Eloise, why must you be like this? I don't understand what I did wrong. If there's anything that displeased you, can't I change it?" Eloise's face darkened, her first doubt about Patrick's intelligence. She had originally seen that Patrick had a fiercer ambition than others, which was why she decided to support him, but she didn't expect that at some point he had completely lost his original wildness. Wasn't it great to focus on career? Why obsess over all these nonsense? "Patrick, you need to understand a fact. I'm your boss and will only be your boss," Eloise said coldly, in the most calm tone, delivering the cruelest words. "I supported you solely for profit. Don't harbor any unrealistic fantasies. It's better for the company and you." The boy stared at the woman in front of him, dressed by a stylist. He was indeed a striking presence at the event, but in Eloise's eyes, he was just one among many. "If you still have some sense now, go back to your place and do what you should, instead of standing here, being a man who relies on a woman to rise." She had been straightforward enough, her usual style being to stop at hints, and Eloise didn't have the patience to care for a child's feelings. The woman turned around decisively, leaving Patrick immersed in sadness and another bystander purely enjoying the drama. After the drama ended, Jim gave Patrick another meaningful look, then moved to catch up with Eloise. In the corner, the boy lowered his head alone, his brows filled with dense gloom. Resentment and anger clashed with his rationality, shouting in the depths of his heart, expressing his injustice. Why? Why them and not him?